Rahul, welcome to Masters of Scale.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
It's great to have you here. I was tempted to ask Grammarly to help me with my opening question for you.
This is something Grammarly could have helped you with if you had asked Grammarly.
For those who might have heard of Grammarly, heard one of your ads, or seen one on TV, but haven't worked with Grammarly, how do you describe what Grammarly is and what you do?
It all starts from our mission. The mission of Grammarly is to improve lives by improving communication. And that's what we're all about. We're here to help people communicate better, to communicate more effectively, to get your point across, to be understood. It is something we do more than any other activity during our waking hours. We communicate with other people. And our mission in life is to help you do that better and more effectively.
Why do you think that's so important, particularly now as we sit here talking in 2024? Why is clear and effective communication important enough to be the core mission of a company?
Well, communication has always been important. It is what defines us. If you want to go way back, it's what defines us as a species. We're a social species. We communicate with each other. And our success depends on how well we can collaborate and make our intentions understood to a large group of people. What's made it particularly important in the last decade or so, we've been around for 15 years. A couple of things. One is software has made it easier to provide tools to help me do my job better at communicating. So I don't have to do it all without any assistance. I can actually use software to help me, to give me an assist in doing this important task. But then over the last couple of years, there have been other shifts in how work gets done. Teams have become more distributed and more global. And through the pandemic, it accelerated what had already been something that is in progress, which is more remote work and more sort of distributed teams communicating increasingly asynchronously. And so as a result of all these changes, the weight of the written word was more than it had been in the past. And so the importance of using a tool like Grammarly to make sure that those written words are impactful and have the desired effect on furthering your goals is more important now than it has been ever before.
You've had quite a career. You've got lots of options with what you do with your work life. I'm curious, when you came in to take the CEO role at Grammarly, was there something from your personal life or your own work life that really animated this as a mission for you, where you said, "Gosh, if I can help people communicate better, this is going to be really meaningful to me personally"?
The thing that animates me and defines the choices I've made in my career are I'm a tech optimist, and I want to work on the hardest, most impactful, most meaningful problems that technology can solve. So way back when, in the early days of my tenure at Google, there was a project to build a better web browser. It was called Chrome back then, and it became very successful. But when I joined Chrome, success was far from assured. It was this mission of improving the web platform. And I loved that mission. I loved the idea that we could create a platform that allowed anyone to express themselves creatively, create services and applications that anyone anywhere in the world could access. So I signed up to that mission, and it was an incredibly rewarding journey a decade in. Fast forward to 2021, and I come across Grammarly and its mission to improve lives by improving communication. And I had that same feeling that I did in the early days of the Chrome browser and the web platform. And I felt like, communication and communicating well is such a hard, but such an important problem to solve. And if technology can help you do it better, what a great mission to sign up for. And so if I apply the lens of difficult things take a long time to accomplish, but if Grammarly was successful 10 years down the line, and billions of people around the world are using Grammarly or a tool like Grammarly to communicate more effectively with more confidence, to reduce misunderstanding, that's a very worthwhile mission. That's what tech is meant to do, to make the world a better place. So that got me. I was hooked, and that's why I joined Grammarly.
Yeah, I'm really struck by, it's been a long day. I've got 72 emails still to respond to. And you're right. I might be more curt than I intend. having
Yeah.
Grammarly is like a co-pilot, basically, to say, just hold on a second. There may be, you may not mean it exactly. Just want to make sure is such a
It
powerful
happens to all
tool.
of us. Yeah.
It does. And I imagine if you are transitioning industries or transitioning, I mean, entire fields, there are norms that are different. So how do you all think about that kind of context, right? If you're communicating in a tech company, it might be different than if you're communicating in a manufacturing company or something. So how do you help how does the technology help the individual with that context?
There's a lot of ways in which we can understand, either you tell us or we infer what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish with this piece of text that you're writing. So, for example, maybe you're writing an email to get people to sign up to a project. You're trying to get volunteers because you got this project, you want to get people excited about it, and you're writing this email. Knowing that, knowing that your goal is to get people excited because you want them to sign up for the project, Grammarly can then tailor its suggestions to help you accomplish that goal. For example, maybe Grammarly will give you a suggestion along the lines of, you haven't explained the benefits of this project to people. What are they going to get out of it? Is it actually going to be fun? Is it going to be rewarding? Is there a prize at the end? Is there a specific call to action? Be specific, and that's going to get you a higher level of responsiveness. And so for any given task or any given context, there's a set of things that we know because we're experts in communication. We've been doing it for 15 years. We know what makes a successful piece of communication versus one that isn't successful. And so we can bring that to bear in the contextually relevant moments across your entire spectrum of tools that we use to communicate. Because don't forget, we use so many different communication tools in our lives. You and I are on this platform doing this podcast. I use Slack, I use Gmail, I use Microsoft Word, I use Salesforce. And so in all these different places, I have different goals in different contexts. And I have to tailor my communication style to that specific set of circumstances. And that's what our product brings.
And I'm curious because, if you are writing on Slack or if you are on LinkedIn or any of the social platforms, you can gauge the success of your communication through multiple metrics, right? How people
Yeah.
respond, how many people respond, et cetera. But Grammarly, the data is really just one way. It's the input, not the response. So how does Grammarly learn and get better without the responsive data?
Yeah, that's actually it's a great question, and it has multiple layers to it. So let me unpack it a bit. The first is, how do we know that we're communicating better? That's the question. Can we measure a better piece of communication? Um, it's a hard problem to quantify, but we can see the effects and we can measure the effects when people do communicate better. So, as one data point, on average, a person who uses Grammarly at work saves 19 business days per year, per user per year. And so think about that 19 days. Think about it's about a month, effectively a month of freed up time. Where does it come from? It comes from, there's sort of death by a thousand cuts with communication snafus, right? It comes from, I sent an email, but I wasn't very clear what I wanted. And so people are maybe off on the side trying to figure out what did he want? Oh, let me try to figure out. And then maybe there's a meeting to figure out what the email is asking for. And there's all these things that go into ineffective communication. So if you just remove all of that friction, our data point today is 19 days per user per year. And what that allows you to do as a company, if you're getting the benefit of those 19 days, it allows you to sign on that extra customer. It allows you to maybe open in a new market. And so that's what effectiveness and being competitive in the age of AI brings to you. So we can measure the effects of good communication, even though it is harder to figure out specifically what a piece of good communication looks like versus not in a measurable way.
Right. It's not necessarily, could this meeting have been an email? It's, could this email have been a better email that could have gotten a result much more quickly, the desired result much more.
Yeah. So that's funny, right? Because we keep saying this meeting could have been an email, but that's only true if the email made sense to begin with. And so when you aggregate all of these better emails to remove the meeting that you didn't need because the email was good to begin with, that's how you get to the 19 days.
All right, I want to come back to 2021 when you joined Grammarly. Did you think or did you know that you were going to become the CEO of the company, and how did that come to pass?
I didn't. That was not the plan coming in. I joined as our head of product, and I joined because I really believed that this mission is an incredibly strong and powerful mission. I wanted to be part of it in any capacity. And when LLMs became widely deployed, I saw that as a massive tailwind that increased the ability for us to deliver an incredibly powerful solution to our users. So, right around the time when LLMs were becoming widespread, and we could all see that this was an opportunity for us to reimagine how we delivered value to our users, built on top of these extremely powerful technical base capabilities that large language models provide. That really was the turning point where we said, we're going to really go after this opportunity. We're going to really rethink our product experience. And that's when I took on the CEO role. And I've just been super, super energized and inspired and motivated every single day that I've been in the job.
And after a year plus on the job, how's it going?
It's going great. AI is not for the faint of heart. The pace of change in AI is unlike anything I've seen before. I've been in tech for a while. I've been thinking about AI for a while. Way back when, in fact, I was in a PhD program in AI. I dropped out. I didn't finish. But it's been on my mind. And I've never seen the level and speed at which the technology is evolving and the capabilities are evolving and getting better. That's a wonderful thing. I'm a tech optimist, and I think this is going to make all of our lives incredibly strong, powerful, successful. It's going to be this big way to augment what we do every single day. And so it's been great. There's ambiguity and uncertainty in the road ahead because the pace of change is so fast. But my experience is working on meaningful things is hard and ambiguous, and that's what makes it meaningful and worthwhile to pursue. So,
let's
I'm
go.
excited.
Let's go back to the 1990s for a minute.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, you were super early to AI. What drew you to it, and why did you drop out of that program?
I was, if you go way, way back, I was a math major, and I was interested to understand how we could develop a model of the world to start inferring facts and knowledge that you and I can take for granted. We can look at something, we can look at a set of objects, and we can understand how they work together. We understand the rules of the world, we understand the rules of physics. Even if we're not aware of physics, we understand how they govern behavior. In math, there was this concept of automated theorem proving, which is, given a set of facts, how can you prove theorems that can be generated from those facts? So I came at it from that perspective. And it was a super abstract set of problems, but if he cracked it, it would have had interesting real-world implications because you can build this very large fact base and you can draw conclusions from that fact base. That was the idea behind it. Now, why did I drop out? Well, I published a paper in a pretty prestigious AI journal, way back when. And it was kind of a big deal that I had this paper published pretty early on in my PhD career. But I felt that I wanted to have a bigger real-world impact. I was wondering how many people even read this paper. It was a very kind of specialized piece of knowledge and information. And that's great. This is not a value judgment in any way, but I felt like I needed the real-world impact of the work that I did to really feel motivated to do that work. So I realized that maybe academics wasn't my path, dropped out, joined industry, and here I am decades later.
And I've heard you say that you wished AI stood for not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. I'd love to understand kind of how your AI journey has evolved in those intervening years. How have you viewed? I mean, is what we're seeing today what you anticipated back in the 90s, or is this just wildly different than what you'd imagined?
It is very different. It is very different. I think
How so?
just to simplify a little bit, there were two camps of AI back in the 90s. There was the world model camp, which is let me construct a model of the world and I start concluding facts derivable facts from that world model. You can call it a semantic understanding of the world.
Can you
And
give
then
us an
there was
example? Can you give us an example of that?
an example is, let's say you know a certain set of things like, all people have two eyes, and all I have to think of the exact, but you get my point. You have a set of propositions, and you can derive facts from those propositions.
The
And
Earth is
so
round.
the Earth is round is a fact. And so then what can you conclude from that? You can say planets are round, the Earth is a planet, and therefore I conclude that the Earth is round.
So
So that's kind of the,
it's linear logic.
it's sort of logical progression based on an
Yeah.
agreed upon set of facts.
Yeah.
There's a totally different approach, which was really not in vogue in the 90s, which was don't worry about facts and world knowledge. Build statistical models to simulate your underlying data set. And so you looked at the approach to translate. Language translation was a big AI problem back then. The world model approach is let me understand the rules of grammar. Let me get super deep on the rules of grammar. And let me use that to try and create and take an English sentence and transform it to a French sentence. The statistical approach is let's not worry about all that. Let's just take a bunch of English text and let's take a bunch of French text and let's just train the data to understand the statistical correlations between the two pieces of text, and let's use that to generate output. That statistical model of inferring facts is very different from the linear world model, a semantic model. And back in the 90s, it was very unclear that the statistical approach would actually be the one that won out, but it did. And I think the answer is exponentially larger amounts of compute, exponentially larger amounts of data unlock incredibly high fidelity AI models that I think were not very clear. At least I certainly didn't see it in the 90s. So that's been surprising and frankly fantastic. I think it's been great.
So let's come back to 2021. You join Grammarly. You come in the senior product role. The founders are still around.
Yep.
What happens that you grow into the CEO role? How do you move into it so quickly?
Well, we saw this big opportunity ahead of us. We saw that the advent of large language models, which were getting better by the week, still is, by the way, it's kind of crazy, unlocked huge new opportunities for us. But in order for us to take advantage of these opportunities, we really had to transform how we thought about how we delivered value to our users, both in terms of our product, but also in terms of our go-to-market. We had historically been focused on individual users buying premium subscriptions, but increasingly we were seeing a lot of demand for Grammarly inside the enterprise. And so how do we service that demand? So we were sort of in the middle of a lot of interesting changes and opportunities.
I imagine if you can tell people you can save every team member 19 business days a year, you've got a lot of enterprise interest in the product.
A lot of enterprise, and that's today without sort of all the incredible opportunities that LLMs unlock that we can see coming in the future. So that was the opportunity ahead of us, and so we really wanted to orient the company towards this very large opportunity, which meant doing things differently. And in that process of change, we discussed with the prior CEO, with the founders and the board about who would take that role. And that's when I joined, and that's when I took on the CEO role.
And what was the remit at that point? What were they tasking you with achieving in that moment?
The remit really was, we have this incredible opportunity. We have this opportunity to be a leader in driving transformation in how work gets done, leveraging the power of large language models. So let's go figure out how to make that happen. And that's what we're 100% focused on right now.
We've done a number of Masters of Scale episodes with successor CEOs.
Yep.
Some of them are what are often referred to as refounders. They're tasked with really almost reimagining the company for this next phase, or actually doing so, as opposed to continuing on its current path or slightly evolving it. Do you think of yourself more as a refounder or more as an evolutionary CEO of the company?
I'm not sure that either of those really neatly fit the place we're in. In general, I find what I describe is we have incredibly valuable and strong strengths and assets that we've painstakingly built over the last 15 years. For example, we have a long standing investment in user trust, privacy, security. We've really invested deeply in this area, and those investments are going to be paying massive dividends. They have been helping us because user trust is a core value, but they're even more important now in the age of LLMs. All this data, what's happening to the data? Is my data safe? What's the motivation of this company that's collecting my data? And all those investments are going to be even more important now than ever before. We've also been extremely focused on making sure that we are bringing technology to bear to solve real user problems. Seems like an obvious thing to say, but often you can end up getting enamored of the tech and lose sight of actually how it's going to help a user. And this is baked into our DNA. This is what we've always done from day one. And the technical means by which we accomplish that goal changes over time as tech evolves. Start out with mostly natural language processing, rule-based systems, evolved to machine learning, now with large language model and generative AI. But that idea of we will use the tech in service of solving user problems is a key strength and something that really sets Grammarly apart in the market. And so we want to keep all the things that have made Grammarly what it is today, a very successful, awesome product that adds real user value and that users love. Users love the product. And so we want to keep all those things and then reimagine how we can think about increasing the value we provide to users to help users reimagine how they can do their work in the age of AI. So it's not a refounding, it's not a evolution. It is taking what makes the company great and special and makes us motivated to come to work every day and set our sights to the future. So that's the journey we're on.
When Reid Hoffman left the CEO role at LinkedIn and Jeff Weiner moved into the role, he quite famously went on walkabout for a while, disappeared, literally went overseas. Anyone who reached out to him, he said, referred it to Jeff. Before he was available to Jeff to answer questions and as a resource, but he really made sure that everyone understood that there was a new leader of the company. You're in a little bit of a different situation where you've got a couple of founders still on the board, one who I believe is actually reporting into you. So how is that dynamic moving into a CEO role with the founders still very much involved in the business for you?
It has the potential of being tricky. But it all depends on the people involved, right? So in our case, we're very fortunate. We have our two co-founders, Alex and Max, still very actively involved in the company. They've been at it for 15 years. We've been around for 15 years. And they're here because they care deeply about the company, the people, the product. They care deeply about the mission. And so they play an incredibly constructive role. So I feel very supported by the board, by the founders. We all want for Grammarly to realize its full potential. And we see it. And we're all aligned in doing everything we can to make it happen. So it's actually been a very rewarding and just a great partnership.
Have you had an instance where you've had a strong belief that Grammarly needs to go to Portland, Maine, and one of the founders saying, no, we need to go to Portland, Oregon? There's a different point of view. Both may be well justified, legitimate, et cetera. But have you had a moment of real disagreement about where to go with something, and how have you resolved it if you've had that experience?
Yeah, we disagree. The founders, me, the rest of our executive team, we're all very smart individuals. That's why they're here. If everyone agreed with everyone else, I would really be concerned that we're not actually getting a diversity of viewpoints, and we are all kind of lapsing into groupthink. So we have different viewpoints. It's important for a high-functioning executive team to be able to express those viewpoints, have the disagreements respectfully, but clearly, like not shying away from it. And I'm a firm believer in that. We should be able to disagree, have that conversation, not leaving things left unsaid, with a lot of candor, You need to create the conditions of trust and psychological safety to have that conversation. So let's do that. So everyone can very clearly express their viewpoint. But at the end, we do have to make a decision. And so we're going to make it. My goal as sort of decision maker in chief, I guess, in some ways, is kind of one description of my job. I see my job as not to make everyone happy with the decisions I make, but to make sure everyone felt like their point of view was heard, that I wasn't disregarding information because that leads to suboptimal decisions. So as long as everyone feels that they were heard, that I carefully considered different viewpoints and made a decision, even if you're not happy with the decision or disagreed with it, at some point we all then need to come together and get behind it. And so that's the process we use, and there's disagreements on a weekly basis. And that's great. That's working as intended.
And look, that's very much how I was trained, and it's,
Yeah.
I mean, almost word for word how I describe how at least I attempt to build and work with teams. I think there's a fundamental difference in at least some instances when founders are still involved and they're the ones disagreeing with you. So how have you set things up so that when you have that robust, respectful disagreement, thoughtful debate and dialogue, and ultimately you have to make the decision. You are the decider in chief, and everyone's got to jump in the boat with you and row in the right direction. But the founders profoundly disagree with your point of view. How have you set up to manage that?
Well, we've got clear roles and responsibilities. So I'm making operational decisions for the company. But at some level, we are aligned on the direction we want to take the company. Because if there was a fundamental disagreement on that, I think that would have been a hard thing to overcome. So we kind of, made sure that we were aligned in how we want the company to evolve. And then in the journey on that evolution of Grammarly and the opportunities, clearly there are going to be things that maybe we need to do differently, we see differently, and that's just part of the journey. And so as long as we can have a clear, open conversation and resolve the issues, I think we're in a good spot. And that's how it's played out over the last year.
And that was something you all discussed before you took the CEO role, that there are going to be these moments where we see things differently. And I, as CEO, have to know that if I make this call and you disagree, you're still going to be behind me and work with me to achieve the end. Is that how you all discussed it and set it up?
That's how we set it up. And that's how we work within, not just with the founders, but also with the rest of the executive team. Just recognize that we want to have the open dialogue and the open conversation, but ultimately we got to make a call and we've got to get behind it.
You referenced trust earlier in our conversation, and I'm struck by the framework that you've developed that goes by the acronym TRUE: trust, responsibility, user control, and empathy. Can you talk about how that framework came into use and how you actually employ it at Grammarly?
It reflects our existing practices. It was just honestly a reflection of what we already did. It was a helpful way to frame all the things we were doing to evolve our product, but do it in a way that was true to our values. So, for example, trust is critical. And I think when we created the True framework, it was pre-LLM scaling, but it's more true now than ever before. So all of our investments in a multi-layered security program, all of our investments in privacy and user control, all of those things are critically important now. In fact, more important now than ever before. So it helps us to have a North Star in terms of what the key capabilities are and the key values are we want to keep in place, because it's a very fast-moving landscape and you need some framework to make decisions. So the True framework is our framework to make those decisions. So as an example, there's an open question with AI in terms of, well, is this data going to be used to train the model, or how do I think about my data? And because trust is a key pillar of how we approach our work, and because that's been true from day one, we have the opportunity for every single user of Grammarly, free or paid, individual or business, to opt out of using Grammarly, using their data to train Grammarly's models. So that user control is part of what we mean by trust. So there's meat behind each of these things. It's not sort of an empty framework, but something we use in practice every single day to make decisions.
I feel like You alluded to this earlier. One of our co-founders, Jay Punjabi, says all the time how this is the worst the AI will ever be. Right, every day is literally the worst it
Yeah.
will ever be. It's getting better
Yeah.
by the day, and at the same
Yeah.
time, it's not only not linear, but there are dips. Right, so we've seen, for example. Uh, AI agents return results about how to keep cheese on pizza by using glue because that was in a Reddit post that made its way into the data set that the LLM was trained on. So I'm curious when you look at what's happening in the industry, there's a halo effect when everyone's employing a true model. There's almost a devil effect when they don't, and the media obviously loves to latch on to these stories. So no matter how much of a tech optimist you are, these stories really deeply undermine trust in AI. So I appreciate that Grammarly is doing this. As you, as an industry leader, look across the landscape, how do we make sure that more AI companies are employing these core principles so that we grow in the right way?
We as an industry need to take our responsibility to deploy powerful AI systems very, very seriously. This is a very profound shift in how we do our work. The scale of the shift, like all big platform shifts, I think it's a bit overhyped in the short term and it's underhyped in the long term. And so we, as purveyors of this technology, need to really understand what this means to how people will do their work, what it means to knowledge work in general, and the impact it has on knowledge workers. And we got to take that responsibility very seriously. What's unhelpful in these conversations is very abstract arguments about existential risks posed by AI. Or there was this, at one point, there was this big discussion about what's the probability of extinction caused by AI. This is actually not helpful. These are tools that we can use to augment our potential. That should be the conversation. It's actually quite prosaic. The set of issues that you need to think about are quite prosaic. How good is the quality of the training data? What specific investments are you making to make sure the training data is high quality, it's been annotated well, it's been quality checked? How are you evaluating the output of the model? How are you building classifiers to understand sensitive text and take corrective action? We have built, for example, a sensitive text classifier. It's a project that we call Seismograph, and we've open sourced it. So we hope that other people in the community can take the work we have done and deploy it in their own AI applications. And so I think we can share best practices because as an industry, we must make sure that this technology is deployed in a way that augments human potential. And then, like even outside of the tech, there will be issues that are unforeseen when you deploy it widely to a lot of users. And so what corrective measures can you put in place? For example, in our case, we allow users to provide feedback in the product or through different channels. And then we have a process behind that so that when someone says, this suggestion wasn't great, it was unsafe or incorrect, that's a problem with our tech. How do we make sure that we learn about that problem and we have a systemic fix that we can then deploy in the field very, very quickly? So it's these closed loop processes. These all require investments. These all require careful thought. And that's the conversation that we as an industry should be having.
Given that, and I'm curious if you agree with this, I would argue that there was a massive underinvestment by the social platforms in protecting against misinformation and disinformation. And we've seen, pretty severe consequences of that. Are we seeing, are those lessons being learned by the AI companies as we head into this new era, or are we at risk of history repeating itself in a bigger scale?
I'm actually quite optimistic. I do feel that the conversation is different than it was with the spread of social applications. People do understand the risks. They are thinking about how to mitigate those risks. I see responsible AI conversations happening every single day. I feel like there were some wrong turns in the conversation, like this extinction question, I think was a bit of a dead end path that was kind of prevalent for a while. But it feels to me like that conversation has died down and now people are really thinking about practical technical solutions to responsible AI. What does that mean? And so I'm actually very heartened. I do think that people understand what needs to happen and are willing to make those investments.
Yeah, and yet you can also, I'm sure, appreciate that, particularly for people who are not working in this day in, day out, headlines are scary. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of science fiction, which was, seemingly decades off, which is now it's manifesting in reality
Yeah.
today. And one of those concerns is job displacement. I know you all, unfortunately, went through a reduction in force recently, had a round of layoffs as you prepare for this next era. How do you think about balancing your responsibilities to your team, with building the best run, smartest company possible, and making sure that AI is a net job creator, and we don't fulfill some of these more dystopian visions of what AI can do?
First of all, I do think that AI will be a net job creator. That's always been true. Back in the day when ATMs were first getting widely deployed in the US, there was a lot of fear that bank teller jobs would be extinct, thing of the past. But the reality is, what happened was ATMs allowed bank branches to be created at a much lower cost. Therefore, there were many more bank branches, and therefore, the need for tellers only increased. And tellers could then focus on higher value added tasks instead of routine transactions. I think this is a pattern that we see over and over again with new technologies. And I think AI is exactly the same. There will be some displacement. And so some types of jobs will need to be reimagined and rethought. And I see that as an opportunity. I would encourage all of us, and we in the tech industry need to do our part to make sure people understand how they can harness AI to do their jobs better, more effectively, really, augment their skills that they have. And that's what the promise of AI is. There's this thing that people say, which is, it's not that AI is going to take your job, it's that the person who knows how to use AI will take the job from someone who doesn't know how to use AI. I do think that is true. And it is a bit of a sobering thought. And so I do think it's important for all of us to embrace the opportunity and to understand how we can harness the power of AI. Because remember, we're not passive observers. We control our destiny. We decide how AI can be used to help us be better, do better, be more effective. And so I would encourage all of us to just seize that, be active kind of actors in the story of AI.
I have, believe it or not, 3 high school students, with my youngest just having finished middle school. 2 of my kids are dyslexic. And so, tools like Grammarly are, uh, they're gifts from God. I mean, they are lifesavers. My kids are better students. They're better educated. They become better writers. Uh, and yet they go to a school which is a wonderful school. Let me be clear; it's an amazing school, but that at least for this past year banned the use of AI tools beyond effectively Google spell check, because of concerns about cheating and where the lines are. And I have a lot of empathy for the school administrators. They're not schooled in this. They're not being educated on it. And
Yeah.
yet I'm looking at this going, this is insane. Not only are you hindering my kid's ability to be better educated and a better writer and all of it, but also these are the tools of the next decade plus. They need to know how to use them. They need to be literate in them. You've got entry level $150,000 jobs for prompt engineers,
Yeah.
littering the LinkedIn landscape. So given Grammarly's leadership position in the market, how do you think about educating not just companies, but schools about these tools and how to responsibly deploy them?
Yeah, we are in active conversations with hundreds, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of universities across the US, across the world, all grappling with this question of there's this big technical shift. I'm afraid of it on the one hand, but I see the potential of it on the other hand. And also, I feel some pressure to make sure my students graduating from my Institute of Higher Learning are prepared for the jobs that are going to be created in the future based on AI. So, um, we, first of all, want to have a constructive dialogue. I understand the concern and the fear. It is very new. It is moving very, very quickly as well. And so we talk to educators on a regular basis. We learn from educators on how we could improve the product or change the product in ways that ease some of those concerns. And also just educate folks on this technology is not something to be feared, it's something to be embraced. And if pedagogical mechanisms need to evolve to take account of this new technology, that's great. As an example, one of the features we added to our product for education specifically, which I love, is you can use generative AI in Grammarly, and maybe you're writing an essay, or doing some other piece of work product for your college, and then Grammarly at the end can offer to cite your use of AI. So what are the prompts you ask Grammarly for? How did you actually use AI? And so if someone, the only prompt was, give me a 500-word essay on the Civil War, you didn't engage in the material. So I can see that. But if someone's prompt was, help me strengthen my second paragraph on this point, give me a critique on whether I'm actually persuasively using data to make this point. And then you can see that this interaction with AI helped someone engage more deeply in the material and created a stronger work product at the end of it. So I think these are all solvable problems. We're engaged in these conversations every single day, and we want to be part of the solution.
So two quick sidebar notes to Mark for follow-up.
Yeah.
One, we recently published an AI listeners Bill of Rights, proposed sort of set of disclosure guidelines and responsible use guidelines. We've gotten a lot of feedback that people want it for print also. And so whoever's working on this on your team, we'd love to collaborate with on that.
Okay, great.
And two, I love that you're doing this at university level. I think it's critical we do this at the high school and middle school level. And so I think that there might be a way for us to partner to deploy a first set of best practices for high schools and middle schools. So that, I mean, that the idea of just disclosing the prompts that were used, for example, but the teachers then need to understand how to translate that because they don't know. Right. So let's bookmark that for a follow-up. But
sounds good. Happy to follow up.
Super interesting and exciting. Rahul, you mentioned this new era of competition. Grammarly's been at this for 15 years. You're the market leader. You can't listen to a podcast or put on a sporting event without seeing or hearing or seeing a Grammarly ad. And obviously the product speaks for itself. But you're facing a new wave of competition that is rising about as rapidly as scaled competition has ever risen in any industry. So how do you think about that competition and maintaining your market position?
I welcome it. I'm a firm believer that we want to stay focused on solving real user problems. That's always the kind of the foundation of everything we do. I don't want to spend a lot of my time looking over my shoulder at what other people are doing, because that's time taken away from how can I help with the user problem and how can I uniquely provide a solution to that user problem. So if I look at Grammarly and our journey so far, if you think about the life cycle of communication, you can think of a simple view of the life cycle of communication being there's a conception phase, there's a composition phase, there's a revision phase, and because it's a multi-party interaction, there's a comprehension phase at the other end, right? So I may think about what I want to send you in an email. I'm conceiving of it. I compose it. I write it down. I make it better, make it punchier, have a clear call to action, revision phase, and then you receive it and you comprehend it. What is he trying to say? Let me try to make sure I understand it. And you go through the full cycle yourself. And so we have historically focused on primarily the revision phase of this life cycle. Not because we wanted to, but because the technology didn't really enable us to kind of help people along the full spectrum of this communication journey. Now with large language models, we can and we will. And so that's our journey ahead, is how do we help people through the entire life cycle of communication? And then you look at what we do at work. We are communicating in all these different tools. We are communicating more than ever before. And the effectiveness of our communication is diminishing over time because we're so time sharded and we're just moving from context to context. And so we believe Grammarly can really reimagine how we communicate across all these different tools. I'm sending you an email, and maybe I want to include some context from a product update or a project update. I just had a conversation about that project update in a different channel, maybe in Salesforce or maybe in Slack. Now, Grammarly is in all of these different forums. And so maybe we can pull in the right context at the right time to help you do your job better. And if you can deliver on all of this, I think we can make work more, we can be more effective at work, we can communicate better at work, and I think we can remove some of the drudgery and make work more fun. And so that's an awesome, exciting journey. So that's what we're focused on. I'm sure we're not the only people who have seen this opportunity, hence competition, but that's great. That's how a free market works, and I think that's good for consumers.
And given that so much of our work communication these days is through screens like this, is
Yeah.
part of the evolution non-written communication as well? Will Grammarly head there in a meaningful way?
I think in the fullness of time, we see our vision as we want to help people make conversations at work better. Most of what we do at work is have conversations with other people, one-on-one, one-to-many, internal, external, through messaging, through emails, through video, through meetings. And eventually we want to make every single conversation at work better. And we've started out with a subset of those conversations, but eventually our ambition is to make every conversation better. So
Well,
that's where Grammarly's headed.
I'm excited to see what comes with our video interaction and how these conversations can get even better with Grammarly. I want to loop back for 1 second because you mentioned briefly open source in the context of the true principles. How much is open source part of your next phase of scaling in your vision of this?
Open source is going to be critical. So first of all, as Grammarly, we are big believers in open source. We can contribute open source, as I mentioned, the Seismograph project. But I believe that open source is something that provides a huge boost and a level of transparency to the entire ecosystem and entire industry. So today we're doing a bit of open source, a bit of closed source. We have a set of different models we're using. But long term, I would like to bet on open source as the future of AI. Now, setting aside Grammarly, I think just as an industry, given the power of AI and given the power of the impact that AI can have on how we do our work, I think the sunlight that open source brings is something that we as a society, as an industry, absolutely should be pushing for.
Are you worried about the downside beyond Grammarly in the broader AI industry of open source and allowing enemies of the state, non-state actors, terrorist groups, et cetera, having access to open source AI? And how do we protect against the danger that can come from that?
There's always risk in any approach you take. There's risk with closed source, there's risk with open source. But I think what history has shown us is that open source is the safest mechanism with which to deploy technology. Having multiple people scrutinize, do due diligence, harden over time is actually the surest way to build the safest and most secure systems. Back in the early days of Chrome, we open sourced Chrome. It was a Chromium project. Similar concerns were raised, but ultimately over time, open source is the better model, and I truly believe that.
Well, and Grammarly's been a leader on not operating in countries where deeply values misaligned. So you all are one of the countries that pulled out of Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. I'm curious how that specific decision was made, and then more broadly, how you make decisions about when to say we're taking a public stance here because it's the right thing to do, or the world needs us to do it, or what have you.
I think I'm guided by whether we actually have something unique or something net new to contribute to the debate and discussion. What I would prefer not to do is just add to the cacophony of different viewpoints on things that I'm not qualified to have an opinion on. Ukraine is a very core part of Grammarly. Our founders are Ukrainian. We have a big presence in Kyiv. We have many of our team that is based in Ukraine, still to this day is based in Ukraine. And when the war broke out, it was a shock. It was a shock to all of us and particularly a shock to all of our team members in Ukraine. And so, to me, this was a very simple decision to make. This was really about showing our team in Ukraine that we were behind them 100%. And so we paused, we canceled Grammarly availability in Russia and Belarus because there was active military operations against people that we knew who were colleagues of ours in harm's way. So that was a easy decision for us to make.
And does that lead to challenges if there are, other countries that have been invaded or other countries that are committing atrocities? From other members of the team who say, okay, we did this for Ukraine. Why aren't we doing this here as well?
I think we have to be careful about where we take stands and where we recognize that it's not our place to take a stand on some issue. I don't think it's reasonable for us to have a position on every single issue that we're facing as a society. Why would anyone want to know what Grammarly thinks about some topic? Ukraine is different, though. Ukraine is very central to who we are as a company and how we operate. And so for us to take a stand on Ukraine made a lot of sense and is absolutely the right thing to do and is aligned with our values. So where we feel that there's a very clear values alignment for us to take a stand, we will absolutely do it. But I also don't want to virtue signal by having opinions on everything.
Got it. What's the question I haven't asked you that you wish I had asked you?
The question, I think, is how does a AI-enabled future of work, what does that look like? How does that manifest?
So let me ask you, what does an AI-enabled future of work look like? How does that manifest?
Yeah, great question. So
I got it from a great source.
yeah. So today we spend most of our time having conversations with other people at work, as I mentioned, communicating, all these different settings, all these different forums, across all these different applications. And we're consuming a ton of information as well. And so I don't know about you, but certainly I feel like I'm always on the edge of keeping up with all the things I need to keep up with. I've got all these Slack messages. I've got all these messages, emails, documents that I got to read, can barely keep up. Now people are saying, all right, well, we got AI and it's going to be great because we can now create content at very low cost. So now the issue is, if you drop the cost of content creation down to zero or near zero, you're going to get a lot more content. Simple law of supply and demand. How does that manifest into a better future? Because I'm already struggling with all the content I have to consume. So how does having more content help me? Who's going to read all that content? And so the better future driven by AI has got to rethink how we do our work and how we go about our day-to-day lives. And so the vision we have for Grammarly is that we reimagine your workflows. We reimagine how you synthesize information, get insights from your information to do your work better, make it more fun, make it more focused on higher level thinking versus drudgery. And that's what the future will look like. So imagine a world in which you're trying to figure out that you need to send a project update. And over the course of the last week, Grammarly has been in many interactions where you've had conversations about that project, maybe with the finance team, maybe with the engineering team, maybe with the product management team. And Grammarly can synthesize all of that and say, here's what I think the project is doing and where it's at and where the risk factors are. And you can take a look at that, and it's going to be a pretty good first draft. And you can then say, well, actually, I don't agree with that point, make that different. And maybe Grammarly can also give you insights into corrective actions you can take if the project is off track. Like it looks like you haven't had as many conversations with the finance team as you should have. May I suggest scheduling a meeting with the finance team? Here are the people you should be involved. Here's the agenda. That's what I believe AI can deliver to us in our day-to-day work. And that's what we're trying to build at Grammarly.
And is part of that Grammarly becoming increasingly relational, so that it really understands the nuance of how I write and speak, my culture, my nationality, my background, my personal quirks. Is part of it really making sure that we're not consolidating everything to fit one form, but actually we're giving everyone the ability to do the best version of themselves as communicators?
That's very, the vision very much is we are here to augment you and help you. So our suggestions are going to be aligned with how you like to come across and how you like to communicate. But in addition to that, we're also going to bring in our knowledge of your goals and the audience. And so we're going to give you all of those levers. I want to sound a certain way. My audience is maybe a very broad group of people with less context. So I need to set more context in my communication. Or maybe it's a very narrow group of people with a ton of context, in which case I should really shorten my email because they already have all this context. So the knowledge of your context, the knowledge of your goals and outcomes, all of that gets put together to create just the right email so you don't have to have the meeting.
Rahul, as a Grammarly user and a fan of the product, I'm especially grateful for your joining us today. Thank you for being a guest on Masters of Scale.
Thank you for being a Grammarly user, and thank you for having me. It has been wonderful to spend this time together.